What kind of physique is achievable naturally without taking performance-enhancing drugs such as anabolic steroids, human growth hormone, and sARMS? Well, that's what we are going to dive deep into today. So grab a coffee, a fruit, a protein shake, or whatever you like, because stuff's about to get interesting. And also, if you're new here, remember to hit the subscribe button right now. Okay, so what type of physique is achievable naturally was the question that I first asked myself somewhere around half a year to a year into my fitness journey. I remember that I asked this because I wanted to have some sort of realistic expectation for how far I could actually take my physique naturally. You see, I have never really been interested in taking some sort of performance-enhancing drug, even though it has crossed my mind and I've actually done some research into it. But each time I'm researching it, I always find myself circling back to why I'm building my physique in the first place. And I always find that it's the process of constantly trying to improve myself that drives me to work out the most, and I've always believed that it's cool to see how far I can take my body naturally. Not only that, I also think that the natural aesthetics just look way better than the bigger, more buffed up steroid look, you know? I actually prefer a physique that is a bit smaller, but one that actually has more of an aesthetic appeal. You know, more of the Hollywood actor type physique that you see in the movies. So I'm also very health conscious, which means that I much rather stay away from anything that could potentially hurt my health long term, which steroid use has the potential to do. So these are pretty much the reasons for why I want to stay natural. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's get to the point of this video and discuss what kind of physique is actually achievable naturally. First of all, I want to say that the type of physique that someone can achieve naturally is probably smaller and less muscular than what you might believe. And I don't blame you, because most of us have been brainwashed by the mainstream muscle media, from things like magazines, movies, YouTube, books, etc., that like anyone can be 200 pounds and shredded. But truth be told, this simply isn't the case. So let's find out what is achievable. When it comes to trying to find out the average maximum drug-free muscular potential, I've found two fairly easy to use models that hit the mark pretty accurately. And these are number one, Martin Birkin's maximum muscular potential of drug-free athletes, and number two, the fat-free mass index calculation. So let's briefly look at these one by one, starting with Martin Birkin's model. This is a very basic model that is actually fairly accurate on average for most people, and it is based on the following formula. Height in centimeters minus 100 equals body weight in kilos when shredded at 5 to 6% body fat. So to put an example to this formula, let's say that if you are 178 centimeters, then subtract that with 100 and you get the number 78. So 78 kilos, which is roughly 172 pounds for you empirical users out there, is, according to Birkin's model, your maximum muscular potential at 178 centimeters, which is around 5 foot 10 inches. Remember that this is when you are in peak condition, with shredded abs, visible veins on your entire body, striated arms and delts, and so forth. Now, also keep in mind that the Birkin formula is not a bad rule of thumb for estimating what a hardworking and serious trainee will achieve over a lifetime. However, it doesn't take into account the genetically blessed exceptions. Fortunately, the second model, which is the fat-free mass index, does a much better job at this. So the fat-free mass index, or FFMI, is probably the most well-researched model out there. And even though it is not quite as simple to use as the Birkin model, it's still relatively simple to calculate. Now, I have left a link to a good FFMI calculator down in the description if you for any reason would like to calculate your own FFMI or someone else's. Okay, so with that said, why is FFMI so good then? Well, back in 2014, Eric Helms wrote an incredible article in the Alan Aragon Research Review titled "What Can Be Achieved as a Natural Bodybuilder?" In the article, Eric covered a very interesting study that was conducted using fat-free mass index on steroid using and non-steroid using bodybuilders. In the research, 83 steroid users and 74 non-steroid users FFMI were calculated and compared. The average FFMI of the steroid users was around 25 and that of the non-users was around 22. And to put this into more meaningful figures, the average height of the men in both groups was around 180 centimeters, with an average body fat percentage of around 13%. The average weight of the steroid users was 92 kilos or 202.5 pounds, and the non-users was 82 kilos or 180 pounds. Now, the maximum FFMI of the outliers in the non-user group was 25, and the maximum FFMI of the outliers in the steroid group was 32. From this research, it has then been suggested that the genetic ceiling for a natural trainee is a FFMI of around 25. With that said though, this research was done on 74 non-steroid users, which is a good size of people for a study, but there certainly exists genetically blessed outliers that exceeds an FFMI of 25 naturally. However, they are likely very few, and on average I wouldn't bet my money that people who far exceeds FFMI of 25 are natural. To give some further evidence or proof to why an FFMI of 25 is likely somewhere close to the top of what's achievable naturally, I decided to do a comparison between FFMI and Birkin's model. And here's how Birkin's model look when his predicted figures are converted to FFMI. As you can see, the figures from the Birkin model ends up being on average 3.25 kgs or 7 pounds lower than an FFMI of 25. So if you come to realize that you have good genetics for building muscle, then you can actually expect to put on at least another 7 pounds of muscle to your frame compared to the Birkin's model, even more if you have excellent genetics. Remember though that you can't truly find out how genetically blessed you are at building muscle until you have actually done it. Okay, so that's the numbers behind what's achievable naturally. Now, one of my absolute favorite ways to get some more proof for what kind of physique someone can expect to build naturally is actually by looking at the pre-steroid era bodybuilders. You see, the first attempts to synthetically reproduce testosterone was undertaken by 3 groups in Switzerland, Germany, and in the Netherlands in the early 1930s. And it wasn't until late 1935 that they were able to produce both injectable testosterone and oral testosterone. Now, this does still not mean that people who lifted during the 30s and 40s were likely to use steroids, because this was before the internet, before globalization, and before any widespread notion that steroids was a very powerful muscle building or performance enhancing drug. At this time in history, you simply could not look up studies online. You could not translate them from one language to another with a push of a button. In fact, to even know that a topic was being studied, you actually had to be in contact with someone in the scientific community where the research was conducted. Without the contact, you would simply have to wait years until the discovery reached the public. So with that said, when did steroids go public then? Well, public awareness of the performance-enhancing capabilities of testosterone in the US didn't actually happen until 1945. And it did so from a book called The Male Hormone. So it's actually safe to assume that any bodybuilder before 1930 couldn't possibly be using steroids because they didn't exist yet. While it's highly unlikely that any bodybuilder before 1945 was using steroids, simply because they were not known to the public. In the same publication as I just mentioned earlier, Eric also outlines a table of FFMI data on the Mr. America winners from 1939 to 1959, spanning over a period where steroids were almost certainly not used, i.e. pre-1945, to a period where it probably was used, i.e. post-1945. So if we accept the 1939 to 1944 winners as natural, then the average FFMI is 24.9, with the highest reported at 27.3. And if we apply moderate skepticism and accept the 1939 to 1953 winners as natural, then the average FFMI is 25.6 with the highest reported at 28. Now, to put these numbers into perspective, here are a few visuals of bodybuilders from these eras. Okay, so first out, in 1930 and earlier, we know that there couldn't possibly be any use of steroids because they didn't exist. And we had bodybuilders like Eugene Sandow, Bobby Pander, and Ernst Cadine displaying very great looking physiques. And if we move forward 1.5 decade to 1944 and earlier, there were almost certainly no use of steroids at this time either. And we had fine gentlemen like John Grimek, Jack LaLanne, and Bill Barrett also displaying very lean and muscular bodies. And finally, back in 1953 and earlier, there were unlikely but plausible use of steroids at this point in time, and we had guys like Steve Reeves, George Aferman, and Reg Park on front of the covers of the magazines. Now, the reason why I show you these images is simply to communicate that in all likelihood, these kind of physiques are achievable naturally, at least the ones from 1944 and earlier. Okay, so now let's get to the point that I know all of you have been waiting for, which is the natural or not battle that's going on in our modern age. Now, first I must say that I don't like throwing shit on people, and I think that the images of the old school gentlemen that I just showed you already give you an idea of what kind of physique that's achievable naturally. With that said though, I still want to do a comparison between famous modern bodybuilders and physique developers, mostly to help shift your idea of what's achievable natural in our modern age today. The reason why I do this is because a lot of people claim like natty when in fact it's very unlikely that their physiques can ever be achieved naturally. And this is where it gets problematic, because when someone claims natural while actually not being natural, it can really screw with people's mindset. So I only want to help clear out some confusion here. Also, as a quick disclaimer, the following information that I will show you is not meant to in any way explicitly imply that any specific individual is on or not on steroids or other performance enhancing drugs, except of course for those people who have openly admitted so. So with that said, let's start with the first category, which is most definitely not natural. Many of these guys have either explicitly admitted to drug use, or the FFMI is so high that no research made on natural guys can support that they are in fact natural. So first out is Larry Wheels. Larry, this beast of a guy, has a FFMI of somewhere between 27.5 to 29, depending on his body fat percentage. Now, Larry has openly explained in a YouTube video that he is in fact taking steroids. He has a very impressive physique and he is a great powerlifter. However, he is not natural. Next out, we got Callum Von Moger, who at 6 foot 2 inches and 249 pounds at 9% body fat has a whopping FFMI of 29.1, which is far above what's been deemed natural in historical research. Third on the list of definitely not natural, we have Bradley Martin. Bradley claims to be 6 foot 3 inches and 260 pounds at around 5% body fat. Honestly though, I think he's closer to around 10% body fat at that body weight though. But at 5% body fat, he would have an FFMI of just over 31, and even at 10% body fat, he would have an FFMI of 29. He has a very impressive physique, but he's obviously not natural. And finally on this list, we have the man, the myth himself, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who during his glory days had an FFMI of around 28. Arnold discussed his steroid use on TV, etc. and compared it to women taking the pill. The drug of choice for Mr. Arnold was Dianabol, and the dosages were therapeutic with doctor's supervision. Okay, so let's move into the infamous gray area, which is the category of possibly natural, possibly on gear. It's these guys that causes so incredibly much controversy in the fitness industry, because either these guys are extremely genetically blessed or they are on gear. It's very hard to say for sure. In fact, to truly know, these guys must explicitly go out and say so themselves. With that said though, this is likely the biggest physique that you can possibly expect to achieve naturally if you have extremely good genetics. Okay, so starting first with Jeff Side. Jeff Side is 6 feet and weighs 203 pounds at 7% body fat. This leaves him with an FFMI of 25.5. Jeff has an amazing physique that is achievable naturally, assuming world-class 99th percentile genetics. One thing to take into consideration is that Jeff Side has incredibly good genetics and advantages when it comes to his muscle bellies, muscle insertions, and bone structure. This causes the illusion that he looks bigger than what he actually is. And this can be seen very clearly if you take a picture with him in clothes, without pump, and then compare that to a picture where he is shirtless, with pump under good lighting. Okay, so moving on to the second contestant in the category of possibly natural, possibly on gear. We have the YouTube star Jeff Nippard. Jeff Nippard, who are 5 foot 5 inches tall and weigh 164 pounds at 8% body fat, has an FFMI of 26. He has an amazing physique that is achievable naturally, assuming world-class 99th percentile genetics. It is very likely he reached FFMI of 26 since he has very good genetics. In fact, both his parents have competed in bodybuilding. So next up is Steve Cook. Steve Cook at 6 foot 1 inches and 220 pounds with a body fat percentage of 7 receives an FFMI of 26.65. This incredible looking physique is likely achievable naturally, assuming world-class 99th percentile genetics as well. And finally on this list we have Chris Jones, who at 5 foot 7 and 180 pounds with a body fat percentage of 7 got an FFMI of 26.7. Even though Chris never gets crazy lean, he still sits on a quite high FFMI. Now, it's very likely that he actually got incredible genetics for muscle growth. He has actually said that he always grew very well, but that he has always had a hard time getting lean. Okay, so let's get to the last category, which is the likely natural one. What follows are a list of guys who have FFMI that most people with decent to good genetics can achieve naturally. And first out is Matt August. Matt August at 5 foot 5 inches, at 155 pounds with a 5% body fat, got the FFMI of 24.5. Looking at the historical research of FFMI of 24.5 is totally achievable naturally with above average genetics. Sure, August achieves a crazy dry and hard look that actually can look a bit suspicious for drug use, but could come down to good genetics. Secondly, on the likely natural list, we have Greg O'Gallagher from Kinobody. Greg comes in at the FFMI of 23, which historical research confirms is totally achievable naturally with average genetics. Greg has an incredible physique that he has been building over the last 15 plus years. Next up is Christian Guzman, who seems to have a FFMI of around 21.3. Looking at the historical research, a FFMI of 21.3, you can tell that Guzman is most likely natural. Also, for his size and stature, he is very cut but has a reasonable amount of muscle at this body fat. Finally, the last person on this list is Scott Herman. Scott Herman is 5 foot 10 tall and weighs 178 pounds at 10% body fat, which gives him an FFMI of 23. This is definitely achievable naturally with good genetics. Okay, so to summarize, the reason for making this video is to give you a fair point of view of what's achievable without taking performance-enhancing drugs. The Birkin Model calculation are probably best described as a rough average of what's attainable for most reasonably blessed people, and a FFMI of 25 is the number commonly thrown around as the upper limit, even for someone with awesome genetics. But as we have seen, there are people who go beyond that number as well. We know that the FFMI of at least 27.3 is attainable naturally, and in all likelihood a FFMI of 28 as well. Add in some minor advancements in training, nutrition and supplementation, along with some skepticism about whether the most genetically elite of the elite were competing in bodybuilding in the 40s, and I think it's pretty likely that some people can attain FFMI in the 28s naturally. With that said, can a lot of people reach FFMI of 28? Absolutely not. But can a lot of people reach the more conservative limit of 25? Probably not either. Your genetics are your genetics, and some people simply picked the right parents. But FFMI of 25 doesn't automatically mean someone is using drugs. And if you have rocketed your way up to the genetic limits calculated by Birkin's model in your first few years of training, then there is very good reason to believe that you are one of the few that has the potential to actually exceed it. So don't limit yourself based on these formulas and images of what can be achievable. If you believe in yourself and have the mindset that you can reach further than most, then you probably will. What do you think, guys? Is FFMI of 25 achievable naturally or not? Let me know down in the comments right now. And thank you so much for watching, guys. I had a blast creating this video. And if you liked the video, make sure you hit the like button. And if you want to see more content coming your way, then also make sure you subscribe and hit that bell to get notified each time I post a new video. See you in the next one. Bye.